Welcome to the Broken News. I'm your host, Ed Cavett, just a nobody, regular person, willing to give you his Main Street take on the news and politics. Today is the 30th of November, 2020, and I thought for this episode, instead of going over the news, because it is kind of, I don't know, it's not surprising. I've already, a couple weeks ago, or even a week ago, have told you pretty much what's going to happen this week, and it has. And it's pretty much the filling of the Biden administration, and it's not going to change things. So let's just move past that and let's look at something else that's going on, or has gone on actually. The one thing I love about YouTube and the internet in particular is that it's a time machine, and you can actually go back in time and see what people have said and compare it to now, and contrast and kind of pick out what the bullshit was, because now you have some history. So I decided I would go back and look at President Trump's announcement that he was running for the presidency in 2015. He did this ridiculous thing where he went down the escalator, and then within 3 minutes and 25 seconds, he's calling Mexicans rapists, drug runners, and criminals, and we're left to assume that some of them are okay. That's how it starts. And that's the stuff that people really focused on, was that kind of circus. It cemented the feeding frenzy that the media had around President Trump. So because of his money, and he's had the TV show, and he's somewhat of a celebrity, he's exposed. People have eyes on him, and by default that gives him like a special status. He's on a pedestal. He's not just your average village idiot or wackadoodle. He's a little bit special. He has resources, and he has some wherewithal and acumen. So the news media will give him this airtime. Even if he says stuff that's ridiculous, it's just playing in contrast to his position, that he's a celebrity, that has some wherewithal, that he's presumably successful, quote unquote. We'll talk about that in a minute. Compared to any other idiot that, I mean, if you went to a family reunion and somebody there was calling Mexicans rapists, drug runners, and criminals, you might feel a little bit weird about that, right? You'd say, oh, they're just off their cob or whatever. But if they if they had a television show and they've said all kinds of crazy things, and the press has continued to cover it because they're quote unquote successful, then it's different, because it contrasts to that person should have some more sense about them. But Trump really didn't have that patina. He didn't have that finish. And I think the press went for that when they started covering him really hard and heavy in the lead up to his campaign, which I think I have it queued here. I'm debating whether or not to play this. I cut it up into short pieces, and it's still about 14 minutes long, because there's so much that he says that if you go back on, if you look at things now and then go back, and you're like, okay, there's just too much hypocrisy, too much bullcrap. I mean, 5 minutes and 40 seconds in, he's talking about how all these soldiers thousands of soldiers have lost their lives. We've spent trillions of dollars, and we've gotten nothing for it. And he seems really concerned for people's lives and the amount of money that we're spending that's costing people their lives. And then you contrast that to, I mean, we're at war with COVID, and there's no same kind of sentiment toward approaching this COVID thing the same way that we would with like a foreign war. So I know that President Trump has the ability to apply some sentiment toward people who are suffering and losing their lives, and the amount of money that it's costing in addition to that. So I know he can associate those things. But then when we get to this last year, none of it's there. It's gone. He's preoccupied with trying to get another 4 years. So that was interesting. And then from minute 7 through maybe 9.5, he's quoting uh, fake news. So it seems like when the news supports his arguments, it's valid, and when it doesn't, it's fake news. That's nothing new there. So then when we get into him bad mouthing politicians, saying that they're all talk and no action, everyone agrees with this. And this is one of the things about Trump that I find fascinating. I agree with him a lot of times. He's kind of like an infomercial where they portray the symptoms, whatever they're trying to fix with their product. They'll tell you all kinds of different examples and anecdotes and testimonies of people going through this malady, and they expose it in a way that you can relate to it, and you really uh, you feel like they understand the problem, and then that gives you this association that maybe they understand the solution, that what they're selling works, and that's not a true thing. That's not what how things work. Just because you can point out the solution, the problem really well, doesn't mean that you know what the solution is. It just means that you know what the problem is, and that's what Trump does. He identifies the problem, which we agree upon, and then he gives us these weak, non kind of solutions. It's like, I'm going to do this. It's like, okay, how? You never hear about it. It's just this product will do that. How? Magic. But look at how well I understand the problem. You have to, can't you help but think that I know what the cure is and that it's actually going to work? So people buy into that. I don't, but a lot of people do. They hear the truth and then they buy the bullshit by association. So we hear a lot of that here. And when he goes after politicians being all talk and no action, he's kind of playing to that sentiment that people have. One of the ways that he can identify a problem is with the ACA, because it does have some problems. People want single payer. They don't want to have to do all of this, find a health care, be obligated to do this, and if you don't, then you're going to suffer a penalty. It's just one more thing that people have to do and keep track of. And when they can't do it because of the obligations that are unreasonable, then they're penalized. So there's all kinds of problems with that. There's another way that we can do it that just makes it easier for people and they can go on with their lives, right? So I agree with the doing something about the ACA. But again, he's not, he actually said that he's going to replace it and replace it with something better. Here we are 4 years later, and he's still fighting to repeal it and has offered nothing to replace it. Literally nothing. He handed Leslie Stalls, I think it was, in a 60 Minutes interview, the one of the thickest books I've ever seen, every page in it empty. It was just a blank book. That was literally his health plan. So we got literally nothing in in a concrete, identifiable form. It's not just an ephemeral kind of a theoretical nothing. We literally got nothing. A book with blank pages. That's what we got. That's the height of a middle finger. That's not just a middle finger in the air. That's a middle finger jammed straight up our ass. He said that the vets need to be taken care of. 4 years later, we've got more vets on the street than we've ever had. So not being taken care of there. He goes on and says that we need a leader, that the problem with America, or at least Obama's administration, was that he was a cheerleader and really didn't have anything of substance. I'll agree with that. He was a cheerleader. He was like, there's a word for it where you will capitulate on one thing and then it lets you get by with some other stuff. So that's what Obama was. It was basically, hey, America, let's get over racism. We're not racist anymore. Here's a black president. And then that black president does what every white president has ever done before. I mean, he was like a clone of Reagan, just black, you know. So I'm proud that black people can be exactly like white people. Like I've always believed all along, we're all the same. There's nothing that really separates us besides a tan. And Obama proved that. So when Trump goes after Obama, he's hitting that base that understands that he's just a man like anybody else, Obama is. and that he is corruptible and has the same sort of avarice that any other person has. I That's kind of a bittersweet thing because it proves that we're all alike, and at the same time it proves that we're all despicable. So not really good about that. I was kind of looking toward the black community using the experience of being black in America to shape a sentiment that would actually help people, help the working class. And that's a racist notion. Just because there's a black culture doesn't mean everyone who's black is a part of that. So that's another thing to kind of tackle with the whole Obama thing. I'll probably take some heat over that and lose subscribers, but that's just the way I feel about it. Change my mind. He talked about how much he loves China, how China Bank is in Trump Tower, and he's just a big friend of China, and the Chinese are smarter than us and better in business, and I'm going to be better than them in those things. Okay, here we are 4 years later. How do we feel about China? All right, fill in that blank. He talks about how rich he is. He shows a financial statement that says that he's worth somewhere on the order of $9 to $10 billion. He has somewhere on the order of $500 million in liabilities that he said was long-term debt or whatever it is, and it's long-term debt in terms of giving the IRS the runaround for a decade, so you don't have to pay back any money, and it's debt that's going to come due in 4 years as of the time of his announcement of it. 4 or 5 years later, this money's going to come due. So it's not really that long term. I mean, it's about how long it would take you to pay off a car versus a house. So that was total bullshit. And then he knows accounting. He knows what he's talking about. But if you listen to when he talks about his financial statement right here in this clip, he's telling us that his net worth, and that doesn't include his assets or anything. He talks really fast and broken sentences, so it's kind of hard you're left to fill in the blank. And if you fill in the blank wrong, well, that's on you. And by wrong, I mean anything that goes against what he thinks is right. So he holds up the statement, bullshits us about it, tells us that he's rich, he doesn't have anything to worry about. And that's another thing I wanted to talk about too. How rich is he if he owes all this money? And on paper, isn't worth anything that we can tax. It's just weird to me how somebody can file bankruptcy on billions of dollars many times over and be president of the United States. Meanwhile, a Main Street no Joe like me, if I file bankruptcy, I might not be able to find a job because they won't hire you if you have a low credit rating. I might not be able to get a place to live because your deposits are going to be higher if you have a low credit rating. So if you file bankruptcy, it could literally cost you a job, it could literally cost you a house, but if you file bankruptcy for millions and millions, if not billions of dollars many times over, you could be president of the United States. So maybe my problem is I haven't lit on fire billions of dollars in order to be successful enough in business. He went after McCain about he basically said, I'm more impressed by the soldiers who aren't captured and made prisoners of war. Do you remember that statement? Well, I'm more impressed by the business people who don't file bankruptcy. So I'm just going to turn that back around on him. As far as being the USA as a brand and it's not for sale and I need to fix the brand of the United States, I'm not a t-shirt to be sold at Kmart. I'm a human being. And America isn't a brand to be sold. It's a sentiment, a collective sentiment about freedom and liberty and democracy, one voice, one vote, and we have the opportunity to shape our own futures, self-agency and all of that. That's not a brand, and that's insulting. What was the other stuff here? Again, bad-mouthing all the politicians he's running up against. And then he's buddy-buddies with them later on. He kind of reveals at the end of the speech that I feel like the establishment, the Republican establishment, approached Trump because they knew that he probably had a better chance than anyone simply because of all the free press he gets. I mean, if you're always out in front of people's eyes, eventually you're going to get to be relatable. that person, if they have enough time, is going to touch on something that's going to resonate in somebody, and then they're going to be a follower. So it's simply a matter of getting whoever you want out in front of people's faces. That's why so much money is spent on campaigning, advertising, getting a person's picture out there, getting video out there, making them seem relatable and human so that they can turn around and stab everybody in the back. So I feel like the Republican establishment approached Trump because they knew they were going to have that little gift along with him, and that they could bury the liberals with all of this hateful rhetoric that comes out of the 8 years before Trump. So there's the 8 years before Trump that leads up to the sentiment that's growing in America, how our politicians aren't doing what they say they're going to. They aren't living up to the expectations. They're selling us all out, and Americans are no better off. And then Trump comes along and he speaks the truth to that symptom, and we buy the cure, and here we are 4 years later, and the cure is worse than anything that it solves. So that's a review of President Trump's promises. I would encourage you to go back to, I'll leave a link in the description. You can watch the whole speech. It's kind of interesting to see what expectations people have and then what actually happens later on. I hope you enjoy this little, I don't know, vacation from the actual news. If it helps or not, that's just, let's hold people accountable. If you say something now, expect that we're going to go back later and compare. And now that we have a history of 4 years with Trump, we see what that history means to people when they don't vote for you again. And we just need to keep that up. Why Biden's there again, I don't know. I really don't understand, other than that's who the establishment put forward as an option. But he's really no better than Trump, honestly. We're still getting a swamp of corporatists. That's not getting any better. And I don't see anything changing underneath it. So I guess join me next week. If you want to see if things have gotten better, I'll do my best to try and see some light at the end of the tunnel, but I have to tell you, it's not very hopeful. Well, subscribe if you like this. Unsubscribe if it pissed you off. Give me a thumbs up, thumbs down, comment. Do what you do, and let's just have a conversation. Until next time, take care.